Welcome to Fireside History, where the past comes to life. If you enjoy this retelling, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to hear more. Lakshmibai of Jhansi, 1828, India's warrior queen. The air of northern India in the early 19th century was thick with dust and smoke, a land in transition caught between the ancient rhythms of empire and the grinding machinery of colonial ambition, along the plains and fortress towns of Bundelkhand, where rivers cut through sandstone ridges and temples clung to their foundations like weary sentinels. A legend was about to be born. Her name was Lakshmibai. To her people she would become the Rani of Jhansi, a warrior queen who, in the years ahead, would come to symbolize not only resistance, but defiance itself. But to understand her rise, one must first feel the weight of the world she was born into. The year was 1828. The British East India Company already held sway over much of the subcontinent, its banners flying from Bengal to Bombay. Its power was not just in trade and treaties, but in the silent dominance of rifles stacked in barracks, cannons aimed down at river crossings, and clerks in Calcutta who could unmake a prince with the stroke of a pen. Yet there were still pockets of Indian sovereignty. Small kingdoms, princely states, clung to their independence under the complex umbrella of company treaties. Jhansi was one of these, a walled town crowned by its fortress, perched on a rocky hill, the citadel, watching over the dusty bazaar streets below. And it was into this uneasy world that Manikarnika, the girl who would one day be known as Lakshmibai, was born in the holy city of Varanasi. She was called Manu as a child, after the first man of Hindu legend. Varanasi itself was a place of blazing colour and devotion. Pilgrims came to bathe in the Ganges. Ghats rang with the chanting of priests, and the smell of sandalwood and burning offerings drifted on the river breeze. It was here, amongst scholars, priests and soldiers, that Manu's character was forged. Her father, Moropant Tambe, was a court official. Her mother, Bhagirathi, died when Manu was still very young. That early loss left her clinging fiercely to her father's side. He raised her not in the cloistered seclusion expected of girls, but in the company of boys, sword practice, horseback riding, lessons in the sacred texts. Imagine the scene. A small girl, dark-eyed and sharp-featured, her hair bound tightly, galloping bareback through the alleys of Varanasi, astride a horse far too large for her. Traders and holy men would step aside, startled, and some would shake their heads at the impropriety, while others whispered that she carried the fire of the goddess Durga herself. In her teens, Manu was married into royalty. Her husband was Gangadhar Rao, the Maharaja of Jhansi. The marriage was not unusual for the time, but the circumstances of Jhansi itself were fragile. The state was small, strategically located, and bound by treaties with the East India Company. Gangadhar Rao was a man of learning, fond of literature and the arts, but not robust in health. His reign was shadowed by the company's relentless hunger for land and order. As she entered the palace of Jhansi, Manu shed her childhood name and became Lakshmibai. Lakshmi, after the goddess of prosperity, and Bai, the honorific for a queen. Accounts describe her as striking, luminous skin, intelligent eyes, a proud carriage. She was no passive consort. Palace attendants saw her training daily with her horses, sparring with wooden swords, even practicing archery. And yet she was also graceful, versed in music, in Sanskrit, in the rituals of her faith. A fusion of martial vigour and feminine poise that unsettled some and inspired others. It was said that when she walked the courtyards of the Jhansi fort, guards and servants alike could feel her presence like a current of energy, a sense that destiny coiled around her. But destiny, at first, would be cruel. Lakshmibai bore a son with Gangadhar Rao, but the child did not survive infancy. The grief of the palace was profound. Still, they sought to preserve their line. The Maharaja adopted a boy, Anand Rao, renaming him Damodar Rao, to stand as heir to Jhansi's throne. But here, the East India Company revealed its cold doctrine. Lord Dalhousie, Governor-General, had devised what was called the doctrine of lapse. If a princely ruler died without a natural male heir, the company claimed the right to annex his state. Adopted heirs, in their eyes, did not count. It was law as weapon, bureaucracy as blade. When Gangadhar Rao's health failed in 1853 and he passed away, Lakshmibai found herself widowed at only 24 years of age. Draped in white, the young Rani stood before the company's representatives. Her adopted son clutched at her side and pleaded that Jhansi remain under her rule until the boy came of age. The company refused. Jhansi, they declared, would be annexed. The treasury would be seized, the palace vacated, the crown reduced to a pension. Lakshmibai was expected to step aside, a widow, pensioner, a ghost in her own land. But she did not. In those early months of dispossession, Lakshmibai hardened. The palace corridors, once filled with music, echoed now with the scrape of blades, the thud of hooves. She trained not for ceremony, but for war. She learned the feel of steel in her hands, tulwars, the curved Indian sabres, lances for cavalry charges, even pistols smuggled through British lines. She drilled her retainers, recruited loyalists, and above all, inspired the people of Jhansi with her defiance. There is a description passed down in oral accounts. A widow in white, mounted on a black horse, hair streaming, sabre raised, and her voice ringing across the battlements of the fort. She would not yield. The year 1857 changed everything. Across northern India, sepoys, Indian soldiers in company service, rose up in rebellion. Sparked by rumours of rifle cartridges greased with cow and pig fat, offensive to both Hindu and Muslim faiths, the mutiny ignited a broader flame of anger at decades of exploitation and insult. Barracks burned, European officers were cut down, cities convulsed with fury and vengeance. To the British, it was rebellion. To many Indians, it was the first war of independence. And in Jhansi, the question hung heavy in the air. Which way would the Rani turn? At first, Lakshmibai sought to distance herself. She insisted Jhansi had no part in the mutiny, that she remained loyal to her treaties. Yet when mutinous sepoys marched upon Jhansi, slaughtering British officers and their families, suspicion fell upon her. Was she complicit? Did she orchestrate it? Or was she powerless to stop a tide of violence already beyond her control? The truth is tangled. Some accounts say she sheltered surviving Europeans in her palace. Others claim she gave orders to protect none. What is certain is that in the months that followed, the British would brand her treacherous. And in that branding, her path was set, because now she had no choice but to fight. Through the heat of 1857 and into the following year, Lakshmibai transformed Jhansi into a fortress. The walls of the citadel were repaired, cannon hauled into place. Men were drilled in the courtyards, women too, some carrying water and provisions, others training with swords. The Rani herself was a constant presence, riding along the ramparts, her horse's hooves striking sparks from the stone. The people watched her with awe. She was not merely a queen, she was their shield, their hope, the widow who refused to fade. She took counsel with her generals. Among them was the fierce commander Khuda Baksh and a trusted courtier named Rao Sahib. They were not professionals of the company's calibre, But they were bound by loyalty to her cause. The enemy was coming. Everyone knew it. Picture the scene now. It is early 1858, the dry season. The heat presses down on Jhansi like a fist, the air shimmering above the ramparts. From the fort one can see dust rising on the horizon. British columns, sepoy regiments loyal to the company, heavy guns dragged by bullocks. Inside the citadel, Lakshmibai moves among her people. Her armour is light, gleaming in the sun. A pistol at her hip. Her adopted son, Damodar Rao, clings to her skirts before being taken away to safety. Her voice cuts through the tension as she addresses her fighters. We will not surrender, Jhansi. We will fight for every stone, every street, every soul. Drums echo. The first shells thud into the walls. Dust and fragments rain down. Men scramble to man the guns. Women carry water to the ramparts. And there, above them all, on the high battlements of the fortress, the figure of Lakshmibai, sword raised, her gaze fixed on the storm gathering below. The siege of Jhansi has begun. The first cannonballs landed with a sickening roar. Stone cracked, dust plumed, screams carried across the courtyard. The siege of Jhansi was no longer anticipation. It was reality. From every bastion the defenders scrambled to answer. Cannons belched smoke, the air shivered with musket fire, and the steady thud of British artillery became like the heartbeat of destruction itself. And through it all, Lakshmibai stood tall upon the ramparts, her white sari now belted for war, a sabre gleaming at her side, her hair unbound and whipping in the scorching wind. The British force was commanded by Sir Hugh Rose, a veteran officer hardened by campaigns across the empire. His artillery was relentless, pounding the fort walls day and night. For weeks the garrison of Jhansi endured the unendurable. Inside the fortress, every hour brought new challenges. Food grew scarce. Water supplies were rationed. Children huddled in cellars, while their mothers carried stones to reinforce crumbling ramparts. The air reeked of gunpowder and sweat, of fear and defiance mingled together. The defenders were not an army in the formal sense. They were townsfolk, artisans, peasants, a handful of trained soldiers. And yet, inspired by their queen, they held fast. Lakshmibai moved among them constantly. She did not hide in chambers or pray behind veils. She was there, in the heat, in the dust, in the roar of battle. She rode her horse along the parapets even as bullets cracked past her. She steadied men whose nerve was faltering, ordered the guns reloaded, and when the wounded cried out, she was the one who clasped their hands. Her presence was more powerful than any cannon. There are accounts of her nights during the siege. By torchlight she would walk the inner courtyards, the echoes of her sandals on stone accompanied by the low moans of the injured. She would pause by each, speaking words of comfort, sometimes pressing a flask of water to their lips, sometimes tightening the bandage herself. One soldier, fevered and near death, whispered, "If I die, my Rani, bury me with my sword in my hand." And she answered, "You will not die in vain. Your sword is Jhansi's sword." In those moments she became more than a leader. She became the embodiment of their struggle, a widow queen who defied the empire itself. But walls, however strong, can only endure so much. Day after day the artillery thundered. Huge gaps opened in the ramparts, stones tumbling like children's toys, dust choking the air. On the morning of the 24th of March, 1858, the British guns finally tore a gaping wound in the defences. The assault began. British troops and loyal sepoys surged forward, their red coats stark against the dust. Muskets flared, bayonets gleamed, scaling ladders rose against the broken walls. Inside, the defenders fought like lions. Men hurled stones, women poured boiling water on the attackers. Children carried powder to the gunners. The clash was savage, intimate, steel against steel, breath hot, eyes wild. Lakshmibai herself is said to have joined the melee. Mounted astride her war horse, she galloped along the inner streets, shouting commands. Her sabre slashed, her pistol barked. Witnesses swore she seemed untouchable, as if the goddess Durga had descended to defend Jhansi. Yet still, the tide pressed inward. The British were disciplined, relentless. Their guns thundered, even as their infantry clawed through the breaches. By early April, the situation was dire. Jhansi was bleeding. Ammunition was low, casualties mounting. The enemy had forced their way into the city, house by house, street by street. In the palace, Lakshmibai gathered her council. Her adopted son, Damodar Rao, just a boy, clung to her sari. Around the table the men's faces were grim. One urged surrender, another silence. She listened, eyes blazing, then rose. "I will not give Jhansi to them in chains," she declared. "If we cannot hold the walls, we will fight beyond them." The council fell silent. They understood. She would break out. The night of her escape has passed into legend. A moonless sky, the city burning, shadows flickering across broken walls. Lakshmibai prepared not as a queen, but as a warrior. She bound her sari tightly, armour plates strapped across her chest, pistols at her belt, her sabre gleaming. Her horse, a towering black stallion, snorted and pawed the ground. Behind her, attendants strapped the young Damodar Rao to her back with ropes of cloth, so that even in the chaos he would not be torn from her. Then the gates opened. With a cry that cut through the night, Lakshmibai spurred her horse forward. A small band of riders thundered after her. British sentries shouted, muskets cracked, the air filled with smoke and sparks. But she did not falter. Horse and rider became one, leaping over trenches, crashing through enemy lines. Sword flashing, she carved a path through astonished soldiers, her son clinging to her shoulders. Some swore. Later they saw her silhouetted in the firelight, a white-clad widow blazing like a comet through the smoke. And then she was gone, vanishing into the countryside. Jhansi had fallen, but its queen had escaped. Her flight carried her to the fortress of Kalpi, where other rebels had gathered. There she joined forces with Tantia Tope, the brilliant if erratic general of the rebellion. Together, they sought to turn disaster into resurgence. Kalpi became a rallying point. Rebel banners flew, drums beat, men sharpened swords, and trained by torchlight. Lakshmibai once again became the centre of inspiration. She was no longer merely defending her throne. She was fighting for the very soul of India. And yet the dangers multiplied. Hunger gnawed at the camp. Ammunition was scarce. Rivalries simmered between leaders. The British forces pursued relentlessly, methodically, tightening the noose. Still, Lakshmibai pressed on. Her voice carried urgency and fire. "We must show them that India will not kneel. Jhansi fell, but Jhansi lives in us." By the spring of 1858, the rebel leaders turned their eyes to Gwalior, a great fortress city, seat of immense strategic power. If they could capture it, the rebellion might burn anew. Lakshmibai rode at the head of her column, armoured, sword at her side. She was no longer the young widow of Jhansi. She had become something else entirely. A warrior queen, hardened in fire, carved in steel. Villagers along the roads watched her pass and whispered prayers. Mothers held up their children so they might see her, so they might remember that once, in their land, a woman rose against the might of empire. Her enemies feared her name. British officers spoke of her with mingled admiration and dread, calling her the Jezebel of India, the best man on the rebel side. Even they could not deny her courage. And now she approached the gates of Gwalior. The first sight of Gwalior could steal a man's breath. It was no ordinary stronghold. Rising out of the scorched plains of central India, the fortress sat atop a sheer sandstone plateau, nearly 2 miles long, its cliffs glowing with hues of ochre and red in the setting sun. The walls were colossal, stretching across the ridge like the ramparts of some colossal beast. From a distance they looked as if the earth itself had heaved upward and been crowned with battlements. Turrets studded the line of stone. Gatehouses stood like teeth, each more formidable than the last, their wooden doors reinforced with iron spikes to repel war elephants. Within those walls lay not only a fortress, but a city. Temples whose spires pierced the sky, palaces adorned with carved sandstone lattices, reservoirs cut deep into the rock to sustain life through endless siege. For centuries, Gwalior had been coveted by kings and emperors, Rajput chieftains, Delhi sultans, the Mughals. All had fought for its possession. Whoever held Gwalior held the heart of central India. And now, in the summer of 1858, its gates were watched anxiously as Lakshmibai approached. Her arrival was no simple procession. The dust of the plains rose behind her column of riders. Rebels, weary from weeks of retreat, their clothes torn, their horses lean, their weapons battered, but still held with determination. At their centre rode the Rani herself, astride her black horse, sari bound tightly for the saddle, sabre flashing at her side. The people of Gwalior lined the roads leading to the fortress, their faces masks of uncertainty. Some whispered prayers, others cursed under their breath, for to throw open the gates was to risk the wrath of the British. To refuse was to betray their countrymen. And above them all, in the palace chambers, Maharaja Jayajirao Scindia wavered. Young, cautious, ever caught between the company and his people, he had tried to steer a middle course, and in doing so had earned the trust of neither. His soldiers muttered in barracks, their loyalty fraying, their eyes drawn to the approaching figure of the warrior queen. The tension was unbearable. At the base of the fortress, the rebel vanguard halted. The gates loomed above, dark and silent. For a long moment nothing happened, only the wind tugging at banners, the creak of leather harness, the nervous stamping of horses. Lakshmibai raised her hand. Her voice, calm and resonant, carried up to the battlements. Open these gates. The fight for India stands at your door. Will Gwalior be remembered for courage or for cowardice? The words echoed against the sandstone walls. Behind the parapets, soldiers shifted uneasily. They saw her not as a widow or a displaced queen, but as a warrior who had already defied the empire, who had already turned Jhansi into a legend. And something in them stirred. Then with a grinding of wood and iron, the gates began to move. The hinges groaned, the doors creaked wide. Dust billowed as the rebels surged forward, hooves striking sparks on stone. The people lining the roads erupted in cries, some in fear, some in joy, all swept up in the tide of history unfolding before them. And at the head of it rode Lakshmibai, her horse rearing as she passed beneath the shadow of the gatehouse, sabre lifted high. Her eyes were fixed not on the cheering crowds, not on the wavering soldiers, but on the fortress that now loomed above her. The citadel that had been fought over for centuries, the stronghold that might yet become the cradle of freedom. She had entered Gwalior. Lakshmibai and her allies, Tantia Tope among them, rode through the gates in triumph. The city, vast and ancient, seemed to tremble with possibility. Crowds lined the streets, some cheering, some fearful, as the rebel columns poured in. And above them all rose the fortress of Gwalior itself, perched high upon a sandstone plateau, its walls stretching nearly 2 miles, its gates like the jaws of a beast. For a brief moment, victory seemed within reach. But the British were relentless. Sir Hugh Rose, having shattered Jhansi, now marched south once again. His columns pressed hard, his artillery close behind, determined to extinguish the rebellion once and for all. Inside Gwalior, the rebel leaders argued. Tantia Tope urged caution. Others pressed for bold strikes. Supplies were short, discipline fraying. Yet in the midst of this confusion, Lakshmibai remained a pillar of certainty. She moved among the troops, addressing them not as a distant queen, but as a comrade in arms. Her words carried fire. If we fight together, the land itself will rise to shield us. If we falter, our children will live as slaves. The soldiers roared their assent. Still, in her heart, she must have known how fragile it all was. The fortress of Gwalior was formidable. Sheer sandstone cliffs rising nearly 300 feet, crowned with walls and towers that had withstood centuries of siege. Behind those gates, the rebels could have held out for weeks, perhaps even months. And yet, they did not. Lakshmibai and her allies made the fateful choice to march out, to meet the company's army in the open plain. Why? Historians point to several reasons, each as tragic as it was inevitable. Inside the city, supplies were already strained. Grain and water had to feed not only soldiers, but thousands of civilians who had fled behind the walls. Disease was beginning to spread in the heat and filth of crowded quarters. To sit and wait was to starve. Then there was division. Tantia Tope urged boldness, pressing for an aggressive strike before the British guns could close in. Others feared that if they stayed within the fortress, the wavering Gwalior troops might betray them, opening the gates to the enemy. Lakshmibai herself knew the danger of hesitation. She had watched Jhansi burn when relief never came. And above all, there was the matter of spirit. The rebels were not a professional army. They were farmers, artisans, disbanded sepoys, bound together by loyalty and desperation. To cower behind walls while the British advanced would have broken their will. To ride out and meet the foe in open battle, that was a chance, however slim, to strike a blow that might rekindle the rebellion. So the decision was made. The gates opened. Cavalry poured onto the plains, banners snapping, drums beating, the sun catching on sabres and lances. At their head, Lakshmibai herself, refusing to be a queen, cloistered in stone, choosing instead to ride as a soldier among soldiers. It was a gamble born of necessity, pride, and defiance. A gamble that would lead her to destiny, and to her death. The clash came swift and brutal. British forces advanced under the punishing sun, their artillery raining shells upon the rebel lines. The ground shook, smoke hung low, men fell screaming in the dust. Lakshmibai rode at the forefront, directing cavalry charges herself. Her horse plunged through musket fire, her sabre rose and fell, her sari fluttered like a banner of defiance. Witnesses, even British officers later, admitted she fought with astonishing courage. Time and again she led her men forward, rallying them when they faltered. Where the line threatened to break, she appeared, a flash of steel, a cry of resolve. But courage alone could not stop trained regiments, disciplined volleys, and endless supplies of ammunition. The rebels fought fiercely, but the British pressed inexorably onward. On the 18th of June, 1858, as the battle raged near the village of Kota Ki Sarai, outside Gwalior, Lakshmibai's fate was sealed. The heat that June day was merciless. The sky above Gwalior seemed to sag under its own weight, a white furnace pressing down upon men and beasts alike. The battlefield outside the city was already a charnel ground. Bodies sprawled in the dust, muskets shattered, horses screaming as they collapsed with foam on their lips. Lakshmibai's rebels had fought with the ferocity of cornered tigers, but the British line was inexorable. Volley after volley cut them down, cannon smoke turning the horizon into a shifting grey haze. The sandstone plateau of Gwalior loomed over the chaos, its fortress walls trembling with the echoes of war. Lakshmibai herself rode at the centre of the storm. She wore light armour over her white sari, a crimson sash binding her waist. Her sabre gleamed with blood. Her horse, the great black stallion whose name was Badal, the Tempest, pounded the earth beneath her, and at every charge her voice cut through the roar, commanding, rallying, fierce. She had already seen her lines falter. Men broke under the thunder of British artillery, stumbling back, shields splintered, lungs burning with powder smoke. Cavalry charges ended in ruin as disciplined volleys tore them apart. Still she pressed forward again and again, her sabre raised, eyes blazing with that same unyielding fire that had once defied an empire from the walls of Jhansi. British cavalry wheeled across the fields, their sabres flashing in the pitiless sun. Rebel horsemen met them head-on, lances splintering, bodies colliding with the sickening crunch of bone and steel. Lakshmibai spurred Badal into the thick of it. Her sabre struck. One British trooper toppled, then another. She rode like a storm unleashed, sari whipping in the wind, her hair unbound, a vision as much as a warrior. The men around her, seeing their queen at the fore, found strength again, driving their mounts into the fray with desperate cries. But it was too late. The enemy's numbers were overwhelming. The company regiments pressed on, tight and ruthless. Lakshmibai wheeled her horse, fighting to cut a path clear. She knew she must reach safety, not for herself, but for the rebellion, for the boy she had already smuggled from the city, for the dream of freedom that still flickered. A crack rang out. A musket ball tore through the smoke and struck her. Some said the bullet entered her chest, others her thigh, but whichever the truth, the wound was grievous. She swayed in the saddle, blood soaking into her sari, staining the white cloth a vivid red. Still she did not fall. Badal surged forward, carrying her out of the press of bayonets. She clutched the reins, her sabre still in hand, eyes wild with fury and pain. Witnesses swore she cut down 2 more soldiers, even as her lifeblood poured from her. Every heartbeat was agony, but she refused to yield. Then came another shot, close this time. Her horse reared, screaming, and crashed to the ground, pinning her leg beneath its massive weight. Dust and cries engulfed her. The enemy closed in. Even then she would not be taken alive. Wounded, bleeding, trapped beneath her horse, she still struggled, sabre flashing weakly but defiantly. A handful of loyal attendants rushed to her side, dragging her from the wreckage, shielding her with their own bodies. One pressed a pistol into her hand, her last defence. She fired once, twice. British troopers staggered back. The third shot misfired. Her strength was failing. She looked to her companions, her voice ragged but still resolute. "Do not let them take me." And with tears in their eyes they understood. They carried her from the field, away from the enemy's grasp, into the shelter of a grove beyond the smoke. There, beneath a withered tree, her wounds gaping, breath shallow, faltering she looked to the horizon, toward Jhansi, toward the land she had loved, toward the future she would not live to see. Her fierce, dark eyes quietly dimmed, her breath stilled, and she was gone. Her attendants built a pyre, swiftly, desperately, tearing branches, dousing them in oil. The British were closing in. Lakshmibai's body was placed upon the wood. Flames licked the sky, crackling, consuming. Her final command fulfilled, that her flesh would never be desecrated by foreign hands. And as the fire roared, a hush seemed to fall upon the field of war. Even the British, when they arrived too late, felt the gravity of what had passed. Their reports carried a reluctant respect. She was the bravest and the best of the rebels. Thus ended Lakshmibai of Jhansi, not as a widow pensioner, nor as a dethroned queen, but as a warrior burning in her own pyre, her spirit unbroken even in death. Her enemies believed they had extinguished the rebellion, but in truth they had birthed a legend. To her people, her fall was not an end. It was a spark. Songs were written, stories told around fires, whispers passed from village to village. Mothers raised their children on her name. Freedom fighters of later generations invoked her spirit as they marched. Even now, the echo of her horses' hooves can be felt in the soil of India. The dust of Jhansi, the stones of Gwalior, still remember the warrior queen who defied the empire to her last breath. Her story lived on, carried by whispers and songs. Villagers told of the widow who defied an empire, of the queen who rode with her child strapped to her back, of the warrior who died with her sword in hand. She became more than a figure of rebellion. She became a symbol. To generations of Indians, she embodied the spirit of freedom, fierce, uncompromising, unyielding. In the struggle against colonial rule, her name was invoked in speeches, in poems, in protests. School children learned her story. Freedom fighters sang her ballads. One poet wrote, "In the field of Kotar she fell, not as a queen but as a soldier. It was said with reverence." Because to die as a soldier was to claim immortality. History often forgets the names of women in war. Their courage erased, their blood unacknowledged. But not here. Not Lakshmibai. She stands even now in memory and myth, not merely as India's warrior queen, but as proof that when the fire of resistance burns, it does not care whether its bearer is king or queen, man or woman. It only cares that the flame is carried forward. And so, the flame is. Thank you for listening to Fireside History. If this story moved you, please like, comment and subscribe. Your support helps keep the creative fire burning.